Thank you everyone for joining us again for Waracle's Digital Health series, the patient experience. We had another one of these in November, if you were able to join us, where we talked about the beginnings of the patient experience and introducing the series of events, which then dive into different topics over the coming months. We've got 3 more of these coming up between now and May. For today, we are talking about empowering patients. And just to introduce the subject a little bit, we have 2 fantastic guests to help me out today, dive into the empowering patients world. But where we think about this is digital empowers patients to manage their well-being therapies, consultations, diagnostics, and more, while granting improved visibility of symptoms and physiological and psychological changes. Through mobile, wearable, and connected technologies, patients can gain control over many medical and health-related touch points to encourage people to affect personal change and produce better outcomes in their healthcare. To investigate this further, we've got 2 very good friends who I'm very grateful for joining us today, Clara and Debbie, who I'll introduce in a second, from the world of digital health to discuss use cases and how developments in this technology place power in the palms of patients. And that's quite hard to say at 5 o'clock on a Thursday night, but we managed to get it out. So first of all, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Clara Russell, who is on my left. I think it should be the same for all of you, an experienced general practitioner with a passion for brain health and helping people look after their own. Having worked in the NHS and private healthcare, Clara has a deep interest and knowledge in the benefits of good sleep, but also functional and lifestyle medicine. Clara founded Noggin the Brain People in 2018 with a mission to improve the cognitive health of the nation, intending to grow the conversation around the importance of brain health and to promote ways in which minor lifestyle changes have a substantial effect on well-being and brain health over time. If I can quote Noggin's website, Clara, if you don't mind, we all use our brains in lots of different ways, but the one thing we have in common is the need to look after them. We will look after the cognitive health of the nation. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. That's what we're aspiring to do. I think it's never been more important to be aware of what we can do to look after our brain health for now and also into the future.
Brilliant. Thank you for joining us today. Underneath both of us on the screen, Dr. Debble Wake, CEO and clinical lead for My Way Digital Health, reader at the University of Edinburgh and consultant physician at NHS Lothian. She founded the award-winning My Way Digital Health in 2017 to improve health globally through data-driven solutions, enabling diabetes patients to access clinical data and educational resources through their portal, apps, and website. Debbie, in an illustrious career, which we just read out, has led diabetes education programs in Kuwait and China, maintains academic research interests in novel technology approaches to health education and management. She's previously, excitingly, been resident doctor on STV's The Hour, a health columnist for The Scotsman, and produced the medical podcast series Dr. Pod's Healthcast, which I think was the first of its kind in the UK nearly 18 years ago or thereabouts, and quite possibly the first of its kind in the world. So certainly an illustrious panel. Debbie, you may want to correct any of that. If my research is good, then we're all fine.
Yeah, I'll go with that, David. Yeah, I'm not sure how true it all is, but yeah, I think 99% of it is. But yeah, perfect. Thank you for
being here. Perfect. Thank you very much. And just to introduce Waracle and ourselves, I'm David, principal consultant for Waracle, your host for tonight. Waracle is a leading provider of technology solutions, mainly in regulated sectors such as financial services and healthcare. We work in everything from health service marketplaces to mental well-being solutions to monitoring prescription medicines to high-scale global clinical trials across the world. If that sounds interesting to you and anything else you hear in the webinar tonight, then please do find us anytime at waracle.com, and we'll try to keep the advertising to a minimum and keep it interesting. And that's my blurb out of the way. 2 little bits of housekeeping before I go on. We do have future events for the diary, March 10th, April 21st, and May the 26th at the same times. If you want to come into those, I'll give you more details later on. If you wish to be a guest in one of those, we'd love to hear from you. And I'll go into the specific topics later. Secondly, we're going to run some polls through this tonight, which we didn't do last time. I will send the first one out to you just now if you wish to vote. We recently surveyed 200 people to find out how and why they engage with health technologies. What percentage of the audience do you think regularly used health technology in the management of their health and well-being? Yes, no question. I can see votes coming in already. Thank you for taking part. Now to the panel, and I'm going to be a little bit provocative to kick things off. So on the theme of what empowerment actually is, I found a definition from the World Health Organization, who we're all now more aware of than we used to be, from 1998. They defined it as a process through which people gain greater control over decisions and actions affecting their health. Some years later, in the first ever European Conference on Patient Empowerment, a spokesman then commented, what needs to happen is for doctors to come down from their pedestals and patients to get off their knees. As a way to kick off, how would you respond to that second statement? Clara, how about yourself to begin?
I think that's an interesting and definitely provocative opening. I think empowerment, yeah, it's about feeling a sense of autonomy, isn't it, with regard to your own health, and feeling the ability to make decisions based on that. Absolutely. I think definitely going not too far back, I think there was a sense that doctors and patients were in two separate camps, and although the doctor gave the information and that was what the patient listened to, and that really was the end of the story, but I think we're in a totally different world now. You know, doctor-patient relationships are doctor-patient partnerships now, and that was certainly part of my training some years ago, and I think, you know, to this day, I think, you know, patients are increasingly more involved, and rightly so, in decision making when it comes to their own health.
But for either of you, Debbie, you might pick this up. I assume you don't have a pedestal anymore, or we're trained to have one. Was that statement slightly unfair?
No, I don't think it's unfair. I think I agree with Clara. I think we're taught. I think nowadays the medical curriculum is very much about working in partnership with patients. But I think there are people out there of a generation where actually that paternalistic sort of methodology just still exists. I think it's getting less and less over time, but I think, yeah, traditionally, I think there was very much this sort of gap between doctors telling patients what to do and patients going off and doing it, and I don't think that did anyone any benefits. So I think we are seeing this shift from that paternalistic model of care through to something that is much more partnership, and even, I would say, being driven by consumers. I think if you go into sort of US markets and things, in fact, it's shifted in the opposite direction, where actually patients are the consumers of health, and they're the ones who are driving the decisions and making the decisions about who they see and what tests they want. And so, you know, I think there's another extreme to that. I think we're finding that happy medium at the moment. And that empowerment piece, to me, also a lot of that is around data, I think, and about making people understand their condition, understand what it means, not just through education, but through sharing of really important information and data. So that's always been at the heart of what we've tried to do.
There are good themes there, which we'll get into. But as a second follow-up, I guess in terms of empowering patients, most people in the past, when they met their doctor, would have only presented themselves as a patient. So in terms of empowerment, how do you feel about the difference between where people presented as people with something to ask about versus, I guess there's three camps: the worried well, who are somewhere in the middle, and people who may want to be empowered to stay away from the doctor, which is possibly the ideal, and how that getting away from that pedestal actually affects those three different groups of patients.
Yeah, I think your point about the worried well, and I think the trouble with our National Health Service is it's not really a National Health Service, it's a National Disease Service, and we are not well set up in the UK for prevention of health. And I think that's widely acknowledged, that we tend to be a reactive service that will jump in when people get sick and is great at scooping up emergency care, but we're not great at doing that whole preventative bit. So when people are collecting their Fitbit data and sending it into the GP or whoever, generally we don't have time and we don't know how to deal with that. So I think that a shift needs to happen, I think, fundamentally in the way we deliver healthcare, to be able to say, well, how do we support people who are in that kind of camp of I'm healthy, but I want more and I want to stay well. And I think that's really hard versus, people at the other end of the spectrum where actually they're running into trouble with their care and it's more sort of reactive. So it's maybe not an answer to your question, but it's a bit of an observation.
Perfect. Clara?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think empowerment, it's different things at different times, isn't it? And for people who are diagnoses free and who may have a terminology of being the worried well, but actually are just well and are worried about being unwell and want to be proactive. Empowering them to stay well is one thing, versus people who do have a diagnosis and who are managing a chronic disease and who are maybe managing their own results or managing their own symptoms. And I think empowerment sort of means, or can fit in slightly different ways at different times. And I think, again, knowing, for people who are disease free, I think knowing your normals is really, really important. And again, like you say, people turn up at the doctor when something is really wrong, and especially now, and what's gone on in the last couple of years. People have just had to manage their health differently, and there's been pros and cons around that. But often, we don't think about what's normal for us until things become really abnormal. And I think that's something I think is really important for empowering the diagnosis-free community, and helping them understand when to seek further help.
There's a related point that came up from responses to our survey. So in terms of people, the worry well is an unfair way to say it, I guess, but empowerment, having a sense of personal responsibility. And I guess especially in the last 2 months, more of us have done diagnostic tests in our own time than ever before. So we've all been empowered to know if we can stay in after 5 or 7 or 10 days in the last few months, which is empowering for our personal lives to an extent. But prior to that, because it's probably going to come and go through the pandemic testing phase, do you think we'd get to a point where, even as preventative solutions, this is prescribed rather than something the open market has a hand in, or do both have a say in this?
I think it's always going to be a bit of a mixed economy, I think, and there's pros and cons to each. I mean, I think we are seeing more of digital interventions, diagnostics, social prescribing and things coming from the healthcare professionals. And I think there's no doubt, certainly in long-term conditions management, that if this is something that your healthcare professional advocates, patients are more likely to take it up in that setting of disease management. So, I think that's, having that endorsement and that validation by the healthcare system for certain things is really, really important. And I think a lot of people with conditions would look to that. But the whole open market piece is really interesting, because I think there's so many more consumer applications and coming in for health. It is creating a bit of a divide in those who have and don't have, because often there's a financial cost, and you need to have good hardware to run it. You need to have good internet. You need to have a bit of money to be able to access some of these devices and apps and various things, or diagnostic testing at home. So, but they're out there. They're on the open market, and I think that interface between how these things work that are being delivered through prescription and things that people are just going out and buying and using is really interesting, because I think, again, NHS practitioners struggle when patients go out and they're accessing all these apps and technologies and ECG monitors through their smartphones and different things, and they bring these to the healthcare service. And of course, most NHS consultants or GPs don't even know about these apps, don't know how they work, don't know how to deal with this plethora of technology and home diagnostics. So it does create a bit of a sort of quandary in terms of the stuff that's out there. But there is some good services coming into place that can help kind of validate some of these apps and help, I think, recommendations around them as well, because there is an issue there as well around, how do we make sure that actually what our patients are using is safe? Has it gone through any sort of accreditation? And I think that's something that's starting to shape a little bit more, certainly in the UK, around some sort of standardization bodies and things.
Clara?
I think, yeah, I mean, I would echo Debbie's points, and I think communication has such an important role to play in that as well. And going back to what we said previous about the importance of the doctor-patient partnership, I think when patients or people are everyone's looking at the apps or data that's available to them and bringing it to their doctors. It's about communication between how those results or what they're monitoring actually fits into the wider picture of their healthcare. And again, the doctors being open to that, which I think in theory most people are. But again, there's the realities of time, understanding what the app's about, or understanding what company they've got the results from, or all the sort of variables that go with that. And I think again, there's a generational aspect as well, and we sort of touched on that slightly before, but elderly people who obviously are often the ones that have the most amount of diagnoses, sometimes still would prefer maybe a bit more of a paternalistic role from their doctor. So again, it's just finding the right balance, and finding what's right for different sort of groups and types of people, which is, you know, part of the challenge, I think.
It's interesting. I think there was a statistic that only something like 1 in 5 people who conduct the lateral flow tests actually report the results. So I guess that the empowerment bit's been done, but they're not willing to be in partnership with the reason you got it in the first place, which helps everyone to understand. We've got a question that's come in along these lines, but actually quite pertinent to lateral flows as an example. You both mentioned partnerships along the way. Is scaling a health partnership only possible with digital technologies? The question from the audience. Thank you for sending it. Who wants to take that one first? I will pick Clara.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. I mean, I think you know, everything is digitalized. Health records are, you know, digitalized. GP practices over the last few years. I mean, I remember when I first started in practice as a locum, you would still work in some practices who had the old-fashioned health records, and then you would have some that had the digitalized records. And again, now that's just a totally different scenario. So again, I think in terms of, you know, what everything, you know, digitalization is the future, and I think that's essential to building anything that's going to have longevity and really make an impact in terms of health. And again, I think patients having access to their health records is a key part of that, and I think that's something, you know, and it's going to become more and more prevalent.
I guess, Debbie, before I give you a chance at this, there's something in my head about the something you said earlier on, that we have a national ill health service effectively. Most countries will be the same for reasons of scale and so on, but is there not a sort of legacy way of thinking about it, that partnership that would solve that is for people to choose to be healthy? So a non-digital way would be for us to eat well, for example, or sleep well, to Clara's example with Noggin and things like that. So is partnership possible away from digital, and it's just that digital makes it possibly easier to track and remind than anything else?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I would agree with that completely. And I think for that wider piece of how do we stay healthy and how do we stay well, it goes way beyond health. So, you know, most of it is around kind of social determinants of health. A lot of people's ill health is driven by their income, by their social circumstances, by their housing, by their access to healthy food on a reasonable budget. You know, and a lot of things, you know, whether we choose to build more cycle lanes into our cities, you know, things like that are way beyond what the health service. So I think the health service always has to work in partnership with, you know, multiple agencies, including people who are at the heart of making those decisions. But you know, it's never straightforward, and that's why I think that whole preventative piece and staying well and healthy piece is really hard to deliver through a health service, because there's so many other factors that influence it. You know, digital, and I think digital can really help with that. But yeah, I mean, it has to. Yeah, it has to span multiple sort of organisations and third sector inputs, and all sorts of things that will input.
Thank you. I have one little supplementary that's come in from the audience. Thank you, Nigel, for sending this in. While COVID accelerated the rollout of digital health technology, does the panel believe patient empowerment is stronger, or the digital divide is even greater? Now, that's a good topic. Debbie, how about yourself first?
Yeah, we've had a really interesting journey, I think, with our own diabetes app during COVID, because there's definitely been pros and cons. So, you know, I think the health service generally has been so distracted by COVID, it's been difficult to do anything else within the health service that isn't COVID related. So that's a kind of separate thing, but it has meant it's distracted from a lot of routine care and even rollout of kind of routine services, and even things like ours that are trying to sort of help people in that environment. Is it stronger? I mean, I think, is patient empowerment stronger and the digital divide greater? I think we've definitely seen a bigger engagement of patients with digital during COVID. I think, no doubt. I mean, when you look at, you know, certainly the COVID app in NHS England, we use, you know, there's the NHS app and NHS login, you know, huge numbers of people have taken that up now as a result of COVID, because it's the only way to get your COVID status. But that has then led to people using that same system and login to access a number of other digital interventions that were always there, but because they never really had an incentive to use it, then they would never have got around to it. So it's kind of motivated people, I think, to doing things like accessing NHS login, NHS apps, being forced to use some online digital platforms to communicate with their GP practice, whether that's through ordering the prescriptions online or other things, which again, they were always potentially able to do, but never took that step to do. So I think it has forced the hand of a lot of people to using digital. So I think there's no doubt that digital is stronger. And as a result of that, I think the patient empowerment piece is there a bit more in terms of, you know, they're using apps as a result of COVID, but that as a result has also given them access to additional things like maybe their own data, prescription ordering, appointment ordering, and more insights. So I think it is better. The digital divide, it's always there, but I think we've seen quite a lot of support for people during COVID who haven't been able to access digital, who now can. And I think the rollout of hardware as well into kind of you know, organisations and into you know, groups of people who potentially couldn't have afforded that. I think there's been a lot of schemes and things that have helped with that. So yeah, I think pros and cons.
Excellent. Clara.
Yeah, certainly. You know, it's been such a challenging time, hasn't it? I think, yeah, I would agree, pros and cons. I think the other thing it's possibly done really is it's forced the hand of you know, sort of GPs and GP practices to look at how they offer services and what can be done. And again, things that people maybe thought they might want to do as a project or as an audit or something, you know, actually it's brought it into the fore and given people from the healthcare side of things the chance to, you know, do things slightly differently, which is always a challenge when, you know, you're working within a system like an NHS or like even a practice. So I think from that point of view, I think it's been really positive that it's given that opportunity for some things to just be delivered differently. I think absolutely the access is a huge issue, and I think it's good that these things are improving, but again, there will always be those left behind in terms of whether it's, you know, due to social circumstances or even disabilities who don't have the ability to access digital technology in the same way that everyone else does. And I think we just have to be mindful of that. And again, there's no one answer or one solution, is there? It's trying to get as much suitable for as many and care for those in between.
Excellent. Thank you for all of those answers. We've a couple more deep dive topics to get into, but we asked a question a few minutes ago in our first poll. So of the 200 people we surveyed, sounds like family fortunes, doesn't it? Of the 200 people we surveyed, how many regularly use health technology in their management of health well-being? More than half, 62% of our audience think is the right answer, less than half, 38%. Now, to continue this, I will end the poll. Thank you all for voting. In our survey, 86% of respondents claimed to use technology in the management of their health and well-being. So way more than half. So the audience was right, but I guess to the extent we're not sure. But only 65% of those claimed to understand health technology and how it benefits them. So we'll dive into that for a second. If you think about the first time many people would have had access to widespread health information, it would have been the advent of the consumer internet and the sort of people who Google, I've got a headache, and all the things that fall from that. Has the democratization of information been a positive or a negative benefit? Debbie, how about yourself?
Yeah. By democratization of information, do you just mean the sort of free reign of information that is out there? You know, are you really talking about that kind of plethora of information out on the internet?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think again, there's been pros and cons to that. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I think generally, I mean, it's just incredible what information we can now get, isn't it, from the internet? And actually, the majority of it is probably, you know, reasonable. I think what applications like ours and others try to do is kind of give people a slightly more curated route into that. So, you know, and I guess that's what we would generally encourage people to do. I mean, I think we've all got stories of patients Googling things and turning up and coming to the completely wrong conclusions, and that potentially leading to harm. So, you know, but at the same time, I think there's probably a lot of, you know, a lot of good general information out there. I think we would just generally recommend try and use good sources, try to go to NHS accredited websites and apps and things that are recommended. But yeah, pros and cons.
not certain newspapers, which we probably shouldn't name, that scare us on a daily basis on minimal information. Clara, how about yourself for that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think information is the route into empowerment and lots of other things, isn't it? And I think, if we're thinking that way, then I think it's a net positive in terms of what the internet has offered. Again, even such as sort of NHS-based websites and an NHS app, all those kind of things. There are a lot of reliable sources of information there, which I think are transformative, really, just even in the last few years. So I think that's incredibly helpful. I guess, as we sort of touched on in the previous point around access, that's still an issue, and access for those who are socially deprived, access for those who are have disabilities, they find the internet or such devices more challenging to use, and the way information is presented for different types of people, I think is a challenge. But I think overall net positive. I think there's ongoing work to be done, isn't there, on regulation and dissemination of information. But again, if we look at the COVID and how that's all happened, if we hadn't had the internet and the ability to educate through that, then the public health campaign may not have been able to take the direction it needed to at the speed that it needed to. So whilst there's been issues there as well, of course, I think overall there's it's benefits rather than problems.
Yeah, we I think, just as an anecdote, so I think hundreds of thousands of hits to our website during sort of the early stages of COVID with people with diabetes who were obviously incredibly anxious about, what impact COVID was going to have on their health. They were just desperately seeking information and being able to sort of, go to sort of good trusted education, good trusted sources of information. And I just can't imagine in the past, people would have just been in this sort of black hole really of not knowing what to do before we had the internet and apps and good websites and things. And the fact you can sort of instantly deliver that sort of information at impact to hundreds of thousands of people and disseminate stuff very quickly, I think in that sort of circumstance it can be incredibly powerful.
It's interesting, actually. We had a question on this that came up earlier on, slightly related. And Adam, sorry, I missed it when we were talking about standardization of apps and things like that a few minutes ago. But this is one of the few times the technology world actually behaved itself and decided that only certain things could be disseminated. So if you were building a service to go in an app store or in an assistant, Google's probably the exceptional. They tried to keep the search clean. Only official COVID sources were allowed through and still are to a large extent. So it's probably the one time that people searching for that information, to your point, Debbie, about diabetes, for example, would have found regulated, checked information. Even people like the BBC tried to do some things early in COVID and weren't allowed to unless the NHS wrote it, which is very unusual nowadays. I mean, correspondents are allowed to do largely what they want, but for once it was shut down. So you're right, that probably helped public to understand what they were coming into.
I guess just in response to Adam, when I was talking about standardization of apps, I was just going to say, I guess I'm thinking about things like Orca, because I think, you've got FDA, Apple can decide what they put on their site, but Orca, for example, is a good example of if you have an app in the NHS and you want it to be accredited by sort of, NHS standards, then there's now bodies like Orca coming in who will review your app, make sure that it's really good from usability, from patient accessibility, all the good stuff that it should be, and they'll give you a score, and that then means that you kind of have the badge of honor and things, and you will go into certain websites that are NHS accredited. So I guess I'm sort of more thinking about more curated things like that I think do help, because as healthcare professionals, there's hundreds, even for diabetes, there's about 350 diabetes apps out there. How the heck do you know what to recommend to your patients?
There are well-worn ways, Clara, I might bring this to you. There are well-worn ways people find things in places like app stores, and I think we talked about this in a previous event, that there's very similar patterns to Orca and the processes that are followed to, not to approve apps, but to acknowledge them at least as competent. They are very similar to how Apple and Google police the App Store in terms of good experience. So things that maybe aren't shut out from the App Store, but things that are promoted. So 9 out of 10 people who search for something find those first, and the rest tend to disappear into what's called the zombie part of the App Store, where people don't know they're there. So there are some similarities that are starting to converge between the digital world and the health world, which is pertinent, and empowering people to find the right things. But then we've another question from Anne that's come in, and Clara and I talked about this offline before we started, so we've probably got a head start on it. The percentage of people in our poll that we mentioned and our survey is quite high. So in terms of people adopting these things, it's more than likely from the younger generation than the older one, than people over 65, for example. We got into this a little bit. So Clara, I have a contrary view on that older people tend to adopt technology more than you think, but what do you think about the generation gap and what we can do for people who may not ordinarily adopt things readily?
I think, there is a generation gap. Of course, there's individuals within that. And again, I think for over, it's hard to not reference the last 2 years, but I think, the internet and the devices have been such a key way for contact and maintaining or having any sort of social contact, particularly for some isolated individuals and particularly maybe those elderly, that I think using devices and being more au fait with those has definitely helped in that regard. And I think that's something that, hopefully will continue for those that have access to it. And, I think health providers have an opportunity to make things friendly and attractive, or applications attractive to people who are in that slightly older age group. I think there will be some that will be never interested and won't want to, like my mother-in-law, but there will certainly be people who are, many in between, who would be interested in being more involved with tech if they felt it was accurate, if they felt it was robust, and they felt it was sort of targeted towards them. And I think, I guess we've seen that with sort of digital companies, that they've made things fun, haven't they? And that's how people maybe interact a lot more with those types of things. So I think health companies have that chance to try and do that, target appropriately, and make it attractive to whatever the age group is of the person.
We talked offline about this. There was an example that Harvard University conducted with old folks' homes in Boston about 5 years ago, where they planted a famous assistant made by Amazon. I'm not going to trigger everybody's devices by saying the brand name just now, but they put one of those in each person's bedroom in a care home. And just to see what they asked. They were told it was a radio, you can ask for the stations and things like that, but you can also ask it anything. And a fairly high percentage of people asked it in the morning, is it raining, or a question along those lines. What they really wanted to know is it a nice day, and do they need to open the curtains or not, essentially. And by knowing that without having to leave bed, their mental health through the rest of the day and over the course of the survey was much better versus the control group that didn't have it. So just a subtle thing that where people are empowered to do something, it may not even be health related, but technology in a way is improving how they feel about life. Just thought that was a nice true story to get across. Little thing to build on here though, which is probably in both your wheelhouses and what you do in your day jobs. So in terms of people having access to all that information, if you flip it round from the sort of sinister side of people looking up headaches and finding out the wrong thing potentially, it's also a positive in terms of people having more options in what they might do to police their health or empower themselves, going back to the topic. So whether it relates to lifestyles, potential surgery they might optionally take, or medication, holistic remedies and things like that, how do you see the positive side of giving people a wealth of information to let them choose how they conduct their empowerment, as it were? I'll say Debbie's on the screen first. Debbie, I'll throw that one to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. I think patient choice, I think, again, it's great, or user choice, citizen choice. Yeah, I think the more we can give people to choose, the better. I think the harder part is often, the easy bit is if people are motivated enough to be going to websites and whatever and looking up information and going, right, I've got a plan, and I could do this, I could do that. That's great. That's that's some ways is easy because they've already made the step to sort of proactively go seek out information and then decide how they're going to do it. So I think they're the group that it's not hard. We can put a number of choices in front of them, and there's loads of different I think options out there now. And I think, as you say, the internet and other consumer apps and things have totally democratized that. So that's easy. I think the harder bit is getting people to that place in the first place. And I think in terms of our challenges around health, if we really want to challenge, take on what are some of the biggest challenges at the moment in terms of health around lifestyle diseases, and trying to change behaviour and motivate people who maybe aren't in that headspace and get them closer towards that bit where they can make choices. I think that's the harder bit, and that's where you've got to just really make it really easy for people to pick up that information, have it right in front of their face, the way they're going to access it, make it as simple as possible, and also just think, well, what are the hooks that are actually going to motivate people into that journey? They've got to see a clear reason to kind of do that and engage in the first place, and to be getting some sort of positive benefit out of it. So for me, that's the real challenge.
Excellent. And before you answer this, Clara, we've got a question that came in privately to us, which must be from a fan. So do you think there's enough information being disseminated around things like holistic therapies, nootropics, microbiome support, and breathwork, sleep health, and so on? Along the same lines with the previous question about empowerment and choice, that's more towards what you do. So what do you think about that subject?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Making the information available to people in different ways is really important. I think I'm just, from my sort of years in practice and having seen people come, and I've worked as a locum and also in private practice, and the people often come and feel bad that they're talking to somebody who's not their usual doctor around symptoms or something they're not sure about. So I think again, simple things first. I think it's that sense of it's okay to ask for other information, it's okay to look for other information, and I think reassuring people that it's their health, and that is a really important sort of route into feeling better. And I think in terms of sort of microbiome and nootropics and those sort of areas, I mean, for me, no, I don't think there's enough information out there, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's not easy. It's extremely challenging, but I think again, my eyes were open to sort of a wider world of healthcare, following sort of personal health issues and also health within my family. And again, I had openly would say I had no idea about things like the microbiome and the role of sleep and those kind of things. And it was really through my own study and investigation that I learned how important that sort of information is. And I think there's a lot more information there now than even there was 3 or 4 years ago around some of those areas, and I think we're just going to continue to see more and more of that. But again, I'm such a believer in the role of simplicity and simple things, and to Debbie's point, people, it has to be easy for people have to understand why simple things matter, and that yes, you can invest in X, Y, and Z if you want to, if you have that ability, but actually the simple things of hydration, the simple things of looking at breathing, mindfulness behaviors, mindfulness activities, sleep, those things that can be part of everyday life at minimal expense or minimal time expense, have great opportunity to help with well-being, help with how we manage stress and mental health, and also have obviously impact on how we manage other diseases and symptoms. So I think the future is bright for that sort of information. Regulation is also important. There's a lot of interesting sources of information there around some of that stuff, and again, as the years go on and as the research builds, I think that will change, and will be it'll be much more just routine that's what we're talking about. But I think it's a really fascinating area, and I think we're going to all learn a lot more as the time goes on.
Thank you. We'll take a very quick breather, and I will just tell you about the future events and give our guests a chance to put the metaphorical kettle on for a second. So the next one we're planning to do, with location to be decided, we think it should be London, but the way things are, who knows, in a month or two. The next event will be about how health research is evolving, a fascinating topic we've dived into recently with Waracle and one of our partners on March the 10th. Then about inclusion and accessibility on April the 21st. And the value of data on May the 26th, which segues nicely into the next topic we're going to get into. And again, if anybody in the audience knows or would like to participate in those as a guest, we'd love to hear from you in due course. And you can find us at waracle.com, and please get in touch, or through the channels here today while you're taking part. And we talked about data very briefly, which leads into the next bit of the survey we want to get into for the last 15-20 minutes or so. When asked about concerns using health technology, a common theme with our survey group was along the lines of data privacy, security, and lack of trust in technology companies. Why do you think people are hesitant to share data with medical companies who are really just trying to forge that partnership we talked about half an hour ago, but less weary of tech companies such as social media who use their data to make a profit. Debbie, this is one I think you'd love to dive into.
Yeah, so we, the data thing's really interesting. I mean, we rely on data to make our system work. So we integrate with GP practice systems, we pull through personal health data. People upload their data into our systems as well, from Fitbits and glucose meters and all sorts of things. And, we'll use that to give them insights back into their care. And, it's interesting because I think most patients in that sort of setting where it's a service that's been delivered sort of in parallel and alongside their sort of healthcare, general healthcare delivery are pretty comfortable about sharing their data. I think when we surveyed patients at the start, they were a little bit wary of it, but actually once they start using the platform, they see the benefits of it and they think, no, actually, this is good, this is sensible, I'm getting a lot of benefit out of this, and most of their concerns go away. I think a lot of the hesitancy is, when they're in that place of not yet knowing what they're sharing their data for, what purposes it's for, and the concerns around potential sort of leakage of private information out into the sort of wider ecosystem. And I think, there's obviously been some scare stories recently about big companies coming in and doing sort of work on big data, perhaps with not the best sort of information governance and consents in place. But I'd say in our experience, actually, we've almost seen the opposite, that in most cases, patients are quite willing to share their data for the purpose of improvements in healthcare. And where the restrictions often happen is with information governance people within the healthcare service. So, just to give an example, we've been trying to do some work on artificial intelligence for diabetes to try and generate work that will predict, high-risk patients, predict, drug response, predict which patients are going to run into problems with complications, so we can kind of intervene early. All kind of sensible stuff with NHS partners and things. And it took 3 years to get access to any data to do that. And we surveyed patients. The majority of them desperately wanted to do. All the clinicians we were working with, but it came down to kind of some privacy panels and people who are custodians of data. So, there is a really thorny issue here between what citizens want, what patients want when they become kind of I suppose a person with a condition that is linked in with some sort of clinical management, through to kind of what the healthcare service needs, and then the whole commercial company thing that sits on top of it. And I think it's something that's debated, but I think at the moment, generally, there is too much risk in the system. I think that there's so much benefit that could come out of wider data sharing that can be done in a sensible way, an anonymised way that really protects people's privacy. And I think a huge amount of benefit that could come out of that at the moment just isn't being realised, because not so much that people aren't willing to share, but that the guardians of the data within the system are not willing to be a little bit more forward thinking on that. But that's just my personal views.
Very good. Clara, how about yourself?
I think, ultimately, when you're asking people to record information, and there's obviously the benefits of how it can help them and why they would even do it. But again, I guess compared to sort of the social media companies and the tech companies, there's just a lot more sort of fun things associated with recording information, and it's just a different type of experience. Health and illness and disease is inherently, it's not something people want to think about. As we touched on earlier, people come to the doctor when things are bad, and again, it comes back to that sort of trying to help with prevention, the early stages of illness, and trying to help people understand that from the earliest possible point that the simple things are important. And by recording information, that obviously helps us learn more about how those things transform into other things and how things can be managed. But I think it's a difficult piece for those involved, I think, because you're dealing with an area that people are just reluctant to talk about. And I think that's where we need to look to continue to sort of break down barriers and encourage open discussion and open communication.
We have a follow-up question with this, and it's actually got a very cheeky supplementary that I've been given to ask, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I'll volunteer my own answer because that's only fair. So the advent of ubiquitous data from wearables and phones and so on make a more empowered patient, but have you experienced where data and technology of these wearables and so on actually impacted somebody's life? And the supplementary is, do you wear devices like an Apple Watch like I do yourselves, and do you take part in these things yourselves as people who would would like to empower patients through that use of technology yourselves. Do you actually use it, and have you seen it work, I guess is the question. Very cheeky, I'm sorry.
I do not wear an Apple Watch, but I've just noticed it's on my wrist. I think one of the isn't on my wrist. One of the challenges I have with Apple Watches is they need charged so blooming often that often I end up leaving it on the charger and then forgetting to put it on. But I would generally use that in terms of my kind of fitness regime rather than necessarily for health monitoring benefits. So, yeah, I mean, I think. I engage with that. Personally, have I seen a situation where it saved somebody's life? Yeah, I think yes and no. I mean, I think from the diabetes point of view, we rely so much on people monitoring their glucose levels at home and things, not so much through consumer technology, but people have seen these sort of Abbott Libre systems, which are now, sit in people's arms, and all you need to do is rock your mobile phone over it, and you get an instant blood sugar reading, and it's checking it every 5 minutes. And that technology has just been absolutely transformative. And I've no doubt that that has saved multiple people's lives with diabetes, where otherwise they could have had serious high and low blood sugar events. They've been able to pick it up early because it's tracking every 5 minutes. So absolute game changer in terms of things like diabetes management. But I think we've all probably seen the sort of Apple Watch ads on TV with people having kind of cardiac events and it being picked up, remotely, and things being rushed out to support them. So I think I mean, I think the technology is amazing. It's evolving all the time, and I'm somebody who I guess I see the benefits so hugely outweighing the risks. If you said to me, I would happily be chipped, be monitored every minute of the day if it meant that at some point I was going to collapse, and it meant that somebody knew that had happened and they came to me and resuscitated me. And I appreciate there's some risks with that my data might get shared with Facebook and I might get extra adverts pinged to me. But I'm personally willing to take any kind of potential what I think are small risks about my data getting shared widely and what that might be implicated on, because I just think the potential benefits and the things that we could do with that data is absolutely huge.
It's funny, we were talking about that very point offline before the call about whether we'd be volunteering to be cyborgs in order to maintain our health after a fashion. And Clara, we talked about this. I mean, in your world, I wear a watch, but the one thing I do is take it off at night to charge it, like Debbie said, so it doesn't track my sleep, which is probably one of the main benefits of it. So I'm probably wasting half the use of the thing. But what about yourself? The cheeky question you don't have to answer if you take part in such things, but what do you think about the use of them?
Yeah, I think the use of them is fascinating, to be honest. I think, I have a family member who has paroxysmal AF, so a very occasional irregular heartbeat, which when it comes does require action, and we have invested in a device to monitor that can look at heart rate, and that's something that, touch wood, since he's had it, he's not had any episodes, but again, the fact that you can do that at home, I think is really helpful. I think, sleep scores I think are amazing. I think that's something, again, there is a whole question around reliability, and definitely nothing's 100%, but I think the fact it promotes a conversation around sleep and how well you sleep, and you can see the difference in outcomes whether you go to bed at a certain time or maybe have a couple of drinks before bed, or those kind of things. People can definitely see an objective difference, and that combined with how they feel, I think is really interesting. I think in terms of personally, those things, and also sort of exercise apps, like I'm a very reluctant exerciser despite my knowing the benefits, but there's knowing and doing are two different things, which I think we all know, and I have struggled to find something that really helps me, motivate me and keep me going, and I have used a company's app that has been extremely helpful in kind of personalized classes and those kind of things, and that's, I think, been really, for me, I've seen great benefits from that. So I think, the potential is there. It's just whether you want to use it and whether you have the ability to use it, I think.
There's a good question to follow up on that, but we've got about 7-8 minutes to go roughly in the webinar. We had one more poll we want to ask people, having got a bit further through. So I'll just launch this just now. But in terms of engaging with health technology after listening to the session, are the audience more or less likely to adopt it and engage with it over time? So we'll let that percolate in the background. In terms of what you just said, Clara, in terms of people having these devices and being willing to use them, one of our responses was, 68% said they would be happy to take readings on a device, and I guess sleep is one of those, and tracking trends, if nothing else, of how they are. Only 51% thought they'd be happy to self-diagnose in some fashion, even using a clinically approved tool. So in terms of the data is being gathered, but people don't feel empowered to use it, how much more can we do to educate people about the use of this technology and trusts that it's in their hands for good effect and to make use of it? Debbie.
Yeah, no, I think it's an evolution, isn't it? I think I think trust in these things will increase over time. I think we're getting more and more used to kind of unconscious AI happening in the background of a lot of things that we do, I think it's just something that's going to, gradually people are going to get more used to that over time, and trust will increase in that. As I say, I think there's probably a lot of stuff that people don't even realize at the moment in terms of when they're interacting with even social media sites, with Netflix, with Alexa. Well, I've said it all. Actually a lot of this is already putting in a lot of machine learning, AI, predictive analytics and things in the background. It's exactly the same in healthcare when you're gathering data, looking at that data, it's just one further step to then use some sort of model algorithm AI to turn that into something that helps you in terms of diagnostics and things. But yeah, I can understand why people might need a little bit of support with that initially, a bit of healthcare professional reassurance, and I think that's appropriate. I think over time that will change.
Clara?
Yeah, and I think it will change. I think, we have seen, as we mentioned earlier, about, recording lateral flow results and those types of things. I think, that's an example of how we're learning to do that for the greater good, not just for our own benefit. And I think that conversation is only going to continue around, why we're all being asked to why there's sort of the benefits of recording data and information. But I think it's still tricky. I think people still feel a certain unease about it. But I think once the reliability and the robustness of the platforms that we're using continue to improve, then I think that will continue to improve also.
There is a question we were thinking about asking. This may be pertinent to what you do in your careers anyway, but if you were to build a device that looked at a particular body part, organ, medical benefit, what would it be and why?
One I thought about with that one was around hydration. I think, again, I'm a fan of simple things and the impact they have. And I think something around, we know that the brain is a very thirsty organ, and when we're even slightly dehydrated, the changes in performance, concentration, our mood, even anger levels, all those different things really are there. And we can mistakenly blame much more complicated things than the fact that we haven't had enough water. So something around hydration and the sort of visible impacts of that, I think I'd be interested to see, and that might also prompt us all to drink a bit more water and feel the benefits.
It's funny, for one of my other half's previous birthdays, I bought one of these bottles that keeps track of how much she drinks, which she now actually religiously watches it to make sure. So it does work if people are encouraged, and it's something they use anyway. Sorry, Debbie, I probably butted into your answer, pardon me.
No, not at all. I mean, I think a lot of my experience has obviously been more around sort of long-term health and diabetes and things like that. So we do a lot of that already. But I think a missing gap is often around kind of mental health and stress and things. So it's not so much a body part or an organ, but I think, better tools that can kind of pick up signals for when people are getting stressed, when they're getting burnout, when they're getting overwhelmed, because I think that feeds in so many aspects of health in other ways. So I think that would be incredibly useful for sort of supporting people around their mental health, which I think is a real issue at the moment.
And Blair's just told me, who's helping in the background running this webinar today, is Wedding Ring is a piece of technology that helps to measure hydration to do with swelling, I gather. So that's a proxy, I guess, for a condition measured some other way, which is fascinating. So we asked a few minutes ago a question: do you feel more or less likely to engage with health technology after listening today? 94% said yes. So I guess we've done our job in explaining some of this today, and hopefully that's been of interest to everyone. We'll end that poll, but 94% versus 6%. That's quite a stunning result. So in closing, just to wrap up everything we've talked about today, what do you think the future looks like for empowered people in relation to their health? Is it more devices, connectivity, information, or even just better empowerment to make decisions around themselves? Debbie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's all those things. I think to empower people, I think data is really important. So I think giving people, access to all the information they need to understand their healthcare condition better, but not just throwing numbers at people, actually making sure that those numbers make sense. We turn those numbers, that information, that data into really easy to understand information and advice that is personalized and tailored for them. And that then links through to kind of, personalized information, personalized sort of education, peer support, social support, whatever the sort of downstream impacts of that are, that person needs to support their health. And I think that's where the future is really bright, because I think the more information we can gather about somebody, the more we can really personalize and help them through a digital medium. So for me, that's, I think, where healthcare is going.
Thank you. Clara.
Yeah, I think personalization definitely is the future of where we want healthcare to be. I think being, mindful of things that are different things are important at different stages. So as we said at the beginning, around wellness and preventing illness is one area. Then, obviously managing chronic diseases such as diabetes and, the wide plethora of increasing numbers of chronic diseases, and how the different ways of doing that. And I think all the way through to later stage life and end of life care. So I think that's something that going forward, I think there will be increasing discussions around how people manage things at the end of their life and how they want to be involved in that. And I think that's, I think that's going to be an increasing area of conversation. And again, it's a very difficult one, but I think it's something that we will begin to talk about even more as time goes on.
Thank you both. That's been a fascinating 58 minutes or so. Thank you so much to both of you for taking part, and thanks to the many people who stayed with us right through the hour. Despite being, I suppose, a technologist, my little digital fire's gone out. I noticed in the background a second ago, so I can't even keep a YouTube fire on for more than an hour. So that's my bad. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. If that's been interesting to you, we are Waracle. We can be found at waracle.com. And as we said, you can find us again on March the 10th for our event about how health research is evolving over time. We hope to see you then. Thanks again to Debbie and Clara for joining us, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks a lot and good night.